Welcome, traveler of stars and seeker of truth. Tonight, you step into a legend buried beneath the ashes of forgotten empires. If the Force guides your path, listen well, for this tale begins not with a hero, but with a warning. The galaxy has known peace, war, and peace again, but beneath those tides lies a prophecy older than the Jedi, older than the Sith, older than the Republic itself. It speaks of a chosen one, a being born of no father, destined to bring balance to the Force. But what is balance to those who feed on chaos? And what becomes of a galaxy that fears the light just as it fears the dark? In the final days of the Republic, one man rose above all, a shadow draped in civility, a whisper called Sidious, a storm called Palpatine. He turned friends into enemies, peace into war, and democracy into empire. But even he, master of the dark side, feared one thing he could not command. He feared the prophecy. He feared the chosen one. Within the sealed chambers of his secret sanctum, hidden beyond the reach of the Jedi, he locked away a file, one he never showed even to his most loyal apprentice. The file was corrupted, buried beneath Sith encryption, marked only with 3 haunting words: "He still lives." No one ever found that file until now. Recovered from the ruins of the Bastion vaults, burned into a shattered datapad wrapped in Jedi robes, the voice inside trembles with urgency. It is male, wounded and afraid. He says the prophecy was misunderstood. He says the chosen one was not meant to end darkness, but to awaken something far more ancient. He speaks of an enemy no Jedi ever named, one buried so deep that even the Sith dared not speak of it. We do not know who he was, nor why his message was erased from every archive, but his final words are clear. The prophecy is not finished. The chosen one was never the end, he was the beginning. And now the balance begins to break again. Prepare yourself. The truth was never light or dark, it was hidden in between. ChatGPT said the outer rim is quiet.
Tonight,
The stars above the desert world of Ossus flicker like forgotten memories, cold and distant, their light barely reaching the crumbled bones of what was once a mighty Jedi library. Sand has swallowed the paths once walked by ancient masters. Time has blurred the edges of walls where knowledge once lived, but even silence carries secrets, and within that silence, a single traveler walks slowly, wrapped in shadows and memory. His name is lost to time, or perhaps willingly left behind. Some call him a seeker, others a chronicler of forbidden truths. He has no lightsaber, no title, only a hunger to uncover what should have remained buried. He moves carefully through the shattered columns and collapsed vaults, each step echoing softly in the dust. His eyes, sharp and steady, scan the rubble, not for relics of war, but for whispers of prophecy. Behind him walks another, a woman dressed in a grey cloak, her hands gloved, her voice calm. She carries a translator unit bound to ancient Jedi scripts. She says little, only what must be said. Her name is Kalith, once a historian of the temple before the Purge. She remembers when Ossus still breathed. Now she walks beside the chronicler not to guide him, but because she too has heard the voice. The broken voice recovered from the datapad. The voice that spoke of a prophecy twisted in shadow. As the night deepens, they reach the vault. Its doorway, half collapsed, gapes like the mouth of some long-dead beast. They step inside. The air is thick with age, the cold scent of metal and stone untouched by light. The chronicler kneels before a shattered plinth. At its base lies the shattered hilt of a Jedi weapon. Burnt into the stone beside it are symbols only the oldest archives still remember. He does not speak, not yet. He only listens. There is something in the Force here, something that stirs beneath the layers of ash and dust, a presence that is neither light nor dark, but something else entirely. It coils around the air like mist. The chronicler closes his eyes. The Force moves like a tide, pulled by a forgotten moon. He sees a temple of gold crumbling in fire. He sees a child with golden eyes standing alone in the center of a shattered council chamber. He hears a voice whispering behind him, old and full of dread. The voice does not speak in words, it speaks in memory. When he opens his eyes, the room feels smaller, tighter. Kalith is watching him. She says nothing, but she knows. She has felt it too. Whatever truth lies behind the prophecy, it is not only ancient, it is alive. And it is waiting. In the far corner of the vault, behind a fallen slab of durasteel, they find it, a rusted holocron. Inactive, its sides scorched as if by fire. The chronicler lifts it gently. His fingers brush the etched surface, and for a moment he feels something push back. The Force recoils slightly, not in fear, but in warning. He places the holocron in the light and activates the translator. The device sparks briefly, then flickers to life. A voice crackles from its core. Not the one they heard before. This one is older, steadier, colder. You seek the prophecy. Then, listen carefully. The chosen one is not a title. It is a trigger, a convergence of wills across centuries, an intersection of fate and fear. You ask why balance was needed. Ask instead why imbalance was allowed. The voice fades. The holocron dies. The silence that follows is heavier than before. Kalith's face is pale. The chronicler lowers the device and places it in his satchel. Something has changed. Outside, the stars remain fixed, but their light seems dimmer. The path ahead is unclear, but the journey has begun, and already the Force is watching. The ship rose gently from the surface of Ossus, its engines whispering against the ancient sands. Inside, the chronicler sat in silence, eyes fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. Kalith stood behind him, arms folded, gaze unreadable. The holocron they recovered lay between them on the console, now silent and inert, as if exhausted by what little it had revealed. He still lives. The words echoed through the chronicler's mind, tangled with that strange voice and its warning, a convergence of fate and fear. A trigger, not a title. They had uncovered something important, but it was only the edge of the truth. Somewhere beyond the known systems, beyond the reach of Republic maps and Jedi wisdom, lay the full shape of the prophecy. If the Chosen One was more than a savior, if he was meant to awaken something buried, then the legends had lied, or worse, they had been edited. The Jedi taught that truth was clarity, but what if clarity was the most dangerous illusion of all? Their destination was a drifting archive station, forgotten in orbit over the collapsed remains of Malaka's sister world. Before the Clone Wars, it was used by Jedi archaeologists to preserve fragments of galactic myth. It had no name, only a registry number burned into its hull. When the chronicler transmitted their clearance codes, the station did not respond. Its orbit was decaying, life support was minimal. But deep within its lower decks, ancient records still slept in stasis, untouched by Sith or Empire. They docked manually. Inside, the corridors were silent. Lights flickered faintly along the ceiling. casting long shadows over rusted walls. Caliph moved ahead, leading the way with a handheld torch. The chronicler followed, the holocron tucked beneath his cloak. As they descended deeper into the station, the temperature dropped. The air became dry, metallic, like breathing in history. They reached the archive chamber. It was circular, vast, with shelves spiraling up into darkness. Most of the holobooks had disintegrated, but a few databanks still pulsed with residual energy. Caliph interfaced her translator, and slowly the systems began to breathe again. Files surfaced, names, dates, fragments of texts long erased from Jedi records. One file opened by accident, a fragment of a personal log written by a master named Juro Kane, dated 2 centuries before the fall of the Republic. The voice that played was soft, thoughtful, tinged with unease. We do not speak of the chosen one outside the council. Too many interpretations, too many fears, but something troubles me. I have seen alignments in the stars, a pattern forming across time, as if the Force is preparing itself for a decision it has not yet made. The prophecy is not linear. It does not speak of a single event, but of a cycle. One that resets, and with each reset, something is lost. The recording ended abruptly. Caliph looked up at the chronicler. Neither spoke. It was the same feeling they had felt on Ossus, as if they were not discovering something new, but remembering something forgotten. They moved to the central vault. This section required voice clearance, but Caliph bypassed it using a script pulled from old Republic algorithms. The door opened slowly, revealing a narrow chamber lined with preserved fragments. Among them was a star map etched into obsidian. Dozens of systems were marked, some long dead, others known to Jedi legend. At the center was a single symbol, the same one carved into the broken stone on Ossus. The chronicler stepped closer. Something about the pattern felt familiar. Not in the mind, but in the Force itself, like a path walked long ago. His eyes closed briefly, and a wave of sensation passed through him. He saw a child standing in a dark room. Not afraid, not angry, just alone. And around the child swirled thousands of voices, none of them speaking, all of them watching. When he opened his eyes, he understood. The child was not chosen by the Force. The child was created by it, a vessel formed at the center of an ancient pattern, a pattern the Sith had been trying to unlock for generations. Not to destroy the prophecy, but to own it, to steal it. Caliph uncovered another recording. This one was corrupted, but a single phrase remained intact. He was not born to end the war. He was born to begin the reckoning. The words chilled the room. The chronicler placed his hand against the star map, and the Force stirred once more. Not with rage, not with fear, but with a calm, steady warning. The prophecy was not a path. It was a threshold, and Anakin Skywalker had already crossed it. The journey led them next to Jeddah, a world scarred by devotion and war, where faith and ruin coexisted beneath the gaze of a fractured moon. Once a sanctuary for those who worshipped the Force, beyond the confines of Jedi or Sith, it now lay silent, its temples hollow, its winds carrying only echoes of prayers lost to time. The chronicler and Caliph arrived under a darkened sky, the atmosphere thin, the surface dust rising with every step as they walked toward the remains of a sanctum older than the Republic itself. The Temple of Kyber stood in partial ruin, yet Fragments of its inner sanctum remained untouched beneath layers of stone and sand. Pilgrims once came here to meditate on the meaning of balance, to seek understanding not through doctrine, but through surrender to the current of the Force itself. It was here, according to one of the archive fragments they had decoded, that an unnamed Jedi had received a vision of the one who would shift the Force forever. The chronicler believed that vision might still be stored somewhere within the temple walls. Inside, the silence was deeper. The Force did not move with clarity here. It shimmered and rippled as though disturbed by something recent. The chamber bore signs of conflict, burn marks along the edges of ancient glyphs, cracked stone beneath what had once been a meditation platform. Kalith knelt by a shattered sculpture of a robed figure, its hands raised in offering. She traced her fingers over a hidden panel and pressed inward. A mechanism clicked softly, revealing a hollow space beneath the statue. Inside was a crystal, dull and cracked, but still humming faintly with power. The chronicler took it and held it to the light. As soon as his fingers closed around it, his mind was pulled inward. Not into memory, but into vision. He stood, not on Jeddah, but above a battlefield. Dozens of Jedi lay fallen. In the distance, a cloaked figure ignited a crimson blade. But it was not the figure that mattered. It was the presence behind him, a presence without form or face, yet vast and ancient. It did not serve the dark side, it consumed it, and it watched Anakin Skywalker like a master watches a pawn. He came back to himself, gasping. The crystal dimmed in his palm. Kalith had seen the change in him. He spoke slowly, voice thick with what he had seen. There is something older than Sith, older than the Jedi, and it is connected to him, not by blood, by design. They left the chamber in silence and returned to the ship. The vision had shifted the direction of their search. It was no longer only about the prophecy or why Palpatine feared it. It was about what he discovered too late. Something that haunted even him. A deeper design, one that perhaps no being, Sith or Jedi, had fully understood. Kalith brought up records of Force cults that predated the Republic. Among them, one stood out. A group called the Echoes. Silent monks who believed that the Force itself occasionally created singular beings not as gifts but as corrections. These beings were not meant to save, they were meant to reset. Their coming signaled imbalance so deep that even the Force could not allow it to continue. The monks believed that such beings would always come at a time of false peace. A time when the illusion of harmony hid a deeper sickness. The chronicler read the texts in silence. The pieces were forming something terrible. If Anakin was not meant to save the galaxy but to cleanse it, then the prophecy had been misread by everyone. The Jedi trained him to be a weapon of light. The Sith twisted him into a sword of darkness, but neither controlled the core of what he was. A convergence, a response, a reckoning. As the ship left Jeddah's orbit, Kalith uncovered one final note buried in a forgotten academic essay from a forgotten scholar. It was a quote, perhaps apocryphal, perhaps not. It was attributed to Darth Plagueis himself. Before he vanished from history, he had written of a vision in which a child born of the Force would destroy all designs of both Jedi and Sith. He called it the Harbinger, the one who walks where balance dies. The chronicler leaned back in his seat, the stars drifting slowly outside the viewport. He still lives. The file had said so, not Anakin, not Vader. Something older, awakened through him, not destroyed, not yet. They had followed a path of prophecy. But now they were chasing something deeper, something that had been waiting in the Force long before the Republic was born. And it was still waiting, watching, preparing. The next destination was Coruscant. Not the glittering city of the past, but the ruins that remained beneath the polished surface. Far below the Senate chambers and hollow towers of the Imperial Palace lay the ancient levels where even the Jedi had once feared to tread. It was there, deep within the substructure of the old temple grounds, that records rumored a vault existed. Not built by the Jedi, but by those who watched them. Archivists hidden in plain sight, keepers of forbidden knowledge. The chronicler did not expect to find anything still intact. After the Purge, after the rise of the Empire, much of Coruscant's hidden past had been razed or buried under reconstruction. But Calith had uncovered a reference to a secondary archive, one disconnected from the Jedi network. A backup, a forgotten well of memory not connected to any central system. And if Palpatine truly feared the prophecy, if he worked to erase it, then this place might be the only space untouched by his reach. They passed through silent corridors filled with dust and flickering lights. Security systems, long dormant, sparked weakly as they approached, but none stopped them. The Force seemed heavier here, pressed between layers of stone and steel. As they reached the lowest level, Calith activated a concealed panel in the wall. A door hissed open, revealing a narrow chamber lined with blank data slates. Only one glowed faintly with power. The chronicler stepped forward and pressed his hand against it. The slate responded. Light poured across the walls, revealing a memory bank still alive, though damaged by time. A single voice emerged, clear and strong. It was Master Yaddle. Long before her final confrontation with Tyrannus, she had begun compiling her private thoughts about the growing shadows. What she said now cast everything in a different light. The prophecy is not about one who will save. It is about one who will end cycles. The Jedi believe in peace through discipline. The Sith seek power through will, but the Force itself is not loyal to either. It only seeks to return to equilibrium. If our actions tilt the scale too far in one direction, the Force will respond. The chronicler stood motionless. Her words struck deeper than he expected, not because they were dramatic, but because they were simple. The Force did not choose sides. It reacted to imbalance, to arrogance, to control, and perhaps to prophecy misinterpreted. Calith began to doubt. She did not say it, but he saw it in her eyes. The legend they had chased, the warning they had followed, might not be what it appeared. What if the prophecy was not feared by Palpatine because it foretold his death, but because he could not bend it to his will? What if all of his efforts, the manipulation of Anakin, the slaughter of the Jedi, the creation of the Empire, were not attempts to stop the prophecy but to rewrite it? The idea brought a sudden stillness to the room, a moment where the chronicler questioned everything they had seen. What if the Chosen One had already fulfilled the prophecy? He brought balance. The Jedi were gone. The Sith were gone. A new order rose from their ashes. Was that not balance? Perhaps what the galaxy called destruction, the Force called correction. But something felt wrong. Too easy, too clean. The chronicler remembered the voice on the data pad, the fear in it, the urgency. If balance had been achieved, why would such a warning have been hidden so deeply? Why would someone risk everything to send a final message into the void? He still lives. The chronicler turned away from the data slate and stared into the shadows at the edge of the chamber. The silence there was not peaceful. It was waiting. The sense that something had been missed crept into his bones. He felt no resolution, no clarity. Only the growing certainty that they had stepped into something designed to mislead. That the prophecy had layers not even the Jedi had understood. As they left the vault, Calith looked back once, then walked ahead in silence. The chronicler paused at the threshold. He wanted to believe the simplest version of the story, that Anakin had fallen, had risen, and through his son had redeemed himself. That the Force had found balance. But legends often offer comfort where truth offers only questions. And the deeper he searched, the more he felt the truth slipping further away. As if the real story had never been told, or worse, had been told in pieces so that no one could see it whole. He stepped into the corridor, and the door sealed behind them. The city above them was still moving, still breathing, unaware of the forgotten truths buried far below. But something had survived, and it was not done watching. The stars over Orsis were veiled in a thick layer of ion haze, their light dimmed by the scars of long-forgotten experiments. Once a minor outpost used for genetic research during the early days of the Republic, it had become a ghost station orbiting a dead moon. No records placed the site within Jedi or Sith history, yet coordinates to its location had appeared deep within the corrupted data of the Bastion holocron. Calith had warned against going. She said, "Some places do not welcome memory," but the chronicler insisted. If the prophecy had been manipulated, if Anakin had been shaped rather than foretold, then perhaps this place held the missing truth. The station was dark when they arrived. Its systems flickered erratically, as though unsure whether to wake or collapse. As they entered, the air tasted old, sterile, a place of cold design. The corridors were narrow and lined with inactive control panels, each marked with symbols, not seen in any Republic archive, not Sith, not Jedi, older, more clinical. As if the Force had been studied here not with reverence, but with calculation. They moved slowly through the facility. Strange containers lined the walls. Most were shattered, their contents long decayed, but a few remained sealed, pulsing faintly with stasis fields. Calith accessed one of the data ports and recovered a single file still intact. The contents were chilling. A report, unsigned, discussing the manipulation of midichlorians in controlled hosts. The language was detached, emotionless. It described the spontaneous creation of life through the Force itself. Not a miracle, a design. The chronicler read the lines again and again. This was not the work of Jedi or Sith. It was the work of those who sought to own the Force entirely. And in one file, a phrase repeated more than once, the subject must not be aware. The vessel must believe it is chosen, not created. The illusion is necessary for stability. Calith stepped back. Her face was pale. The implications were too vast to grasp fully. If Anakin had been born without a father, not as a result of prophecy, but as the product of an ancient experiment, then the meaning of the chosen one shifted completely. He had not fulfilled a destiny. He had followed a script written long before his first breath. And Palpatine, master of manipulation, may have only been a reader of that script, not its author. Further into the station, they discovered a sealed chamber. Inside was a central pod, broken and dark, surrounded by monitors still flashing unreadable data. On the far wall, carved into the metal with deliberate care, was a single symbol, the same spiral they had seen on the star map beneath Ossus, the same mark etched into the ruins of Jedha. It was not a signature, it was a brand. The Force shifted around them, heavy and thick. The chronicler stepped toward the pod. For a moment, he felt as if he were no longer alone. Something unseen moved beyond the veil of perception, not malevolent, but ancient. Not light, not dark, watching, waiting. He placed his hand on the cold metal. A pulse echoed through his mind. He saw not Anakin, but many children shaped from silence, grown in secret, erased from history. Most were lost. Failed, but one had survived. One had awakened the storm. The vision ended, and the chronicler fell back, breathing heavily. Kalith helped him stand, but said nothing. She did not need to. They had crossed into forbidden knowledge. Later, as they sat in the dim light of the ship's chamber, the chronicler stared out at the stars. The prophecy no longer felt like a message. It felt like a reaction, a correction made by the Force itself against those who had dared to harness it. Anakin was not chosen to bring peace. He was born to break a cycle, to end the illusion of control. The Jedi had trained him to resist fear. The Sith had trained him to embrace it. But neither had asked what the Force wanted. In that stillness, Kalith spoke softly. What if he was never meant to serve either side? What if the balance was never about order but awareness? That the Force is not something to be obeyed or defied, but something that must be remembered. The chronicler did not respond. His thoughts drifted to the shattered pod, to the files that spoke of vessels and illusions. If Anakin was not alone, if he was merely the only one who survived, then something else might have survived with him, or through him. A presence waiting in the edges of the Force, watching through the eyes of those who dared to call themselves masters. And it was still waiting. They left Orsis behind in silence, drifting into the edge of the unknown regions where stars thinned and time felt slower. Here, even the Force seemed more subdued, as if cautious. Their next destination was a forgotten moon orbiting a dying star, a place unmarked on any star map, yet mentioned once in a corrupted holocron fragment recovered on Jedha. The voice in that fragment had spoken of a chamber beneath the surface, carved before the Jedi, before the Sith, where those who saw too far into the Force were buried to protect the galaxy from what they had glimpsed. The descent was rough, the atmosphere barely held, and the terrain was jagged, fractured, as if the planet itself had tried to rise against the weight of what lay beneath it. Kalith led the way through the rocky expanse, guided by an unseen pull that neither of them could name. They found the entrance beneath a ridge of scorched black stone. No doors, no markings, only a narrow passage that opened at their presence, as if the moon remembered those who came seeking answers. Inside, the air was thin and dry, the walls marked with deep carvings that shimmered faintly under their lights. Images of figures cloaked in silence, reaching toward a swirling shape in the sky, always the same symbol. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it rested a sphere of crystal, pulsing gently with a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. The chronicler reached out, and the moment his fingers touched the surface, the world around him shifted. He stood within a storm of voices, not shouting, whispering, endless whispers in languages he did not know yet understood. Images flashed across his mind. Anakin Skywalker as a boy, alone in a crowd, his eyes searching. Then older, standing before the Jedi Council, their faces unreadable. Then darkness, a red blade, pain, fire. But none of this was new. What came next was, he saw a cloaked figure not as Anakin, but beside him, watching. A presence not physical, but woven into him, not a ghost, not a master, something older, buried within his existence like a second heartbeat, a will not his own, yet tied to him since his creation. A will that stirred when he felt pain, when he chose anger, when he believed he was acting alone. The vision changed. The Jedi temple burning. Children silenced, and still that presence remained, calm and patient, observing through his eyes. Then Mustafar, the scream of someone he once loved, and still that second presence did not interfere. It simply waited. Only at the end, when fire consumed him and breath was stolen from his lungs, did it withdraw. Not in sorrow, in completion. The chronicler fell to his knees as the vision ended. Caliph rushed to him, but he raised a hand. His voice trembled. He was never the only force in motion. Something was inside him. It used him. Or perhaps it was born with him. Either way, it was real, and it had a purpose. They left the chamber, the sphere now dark and silent. Back aboard the ship, the chronicler reviewed the vision again and again in his mind. The presence was not of the dark side, nor the light. It was beyond both. It was the force made aware, not in its totality, but a fragment given shape. A fragment that had chosen to enter a child born of no father. A fragment that waited through wars and losses until the moment came to shift everything. Caliph said nothing for a long time. When she finally spoke, her words were soft. Perhaps Palpatine did not fear the boy. Perhaps he feared what he could not see inside the boy. That no matter how tightly he gripped the galaxy, something deeper was watching him from within the one he thought he controlled. The chronicler leaned back and closed his eyes. The pieces of the puzzle were becoming clear, but the picture they formed was not prophecy. It was intervention. The Force had not sent a warrior. It had sent a correction. And in doing so, it had unleashed something that did not disappear when Anakin fell. It had only gone quiet. The question now was not who the chosen one was. It was whether the Force had finished what it began, or if the presence they felt still waited hidden in another, ready once more to awaken. The stars ahead looked colder now. As the ship moved silently through the void, the chronicler sat in stillness, no longer driven by questions, but by something deeper, a knowing. Not yet complete, but rising like a shadow beneath calm water. Caliph studied the navigational data, plotting a course toward the remnants of an old Jedi listening station once hidden in the gravitational folds near the moor. It had not been active for centuries. There were no signals, no reports, but it was marked in a buried layer of the Bastion holocron, connected to a word repeated throughout the fragments they had gathered: convergence. The station appeared suddenly, drawn out of the dark like a memory, rising from the depths. Broken towers stretched toward the void, barely intact. Its orbit wavered, its systems dark, but it still held shape. As they docked and stepped inside, the structure felt less like a ruin and more like a shell, as if something once vast had moved through it and left only a husk behind. The Force here was not still. It trembled. In the central chamber, they found the remains of Jedi instruments, some shattered, others intact. Star charts etched with movement patterns, not of fleets, but of anomalies, rifts, places where the Force itself pulsed differently. Caliph activated what systems still responded, and the room filled with layers of data, overlapping maps of temporal waves and gravitational disturbances. Among them was a single term marked in red. Breach event. The time code matched the year of Anakin's birth. The chronicler leaned forward, eyes tracing the coordinates. A point in space, insignificant by galactic standards, yet repeatedly marked across centuries. Not a place, but a moment, a ripple. As if something had entered the galaxy through a crack in the natural order. And it did not arrive alone. Deeper in the archive, a damaged audio file began to play. A voice familiar now, the same one from the corrupted datapad found in the Bastion vaults. Calm but strained, as if resisting something within himself. I followed it. I felt it. The moment it arrived, the force changed, not all at once. Slowly, like a fever rising. The Jedi did not see it. The Sith misread it, but I felt it. In the boy. He was not empty. He was full. But what filled him was not destiny. It was weight. He was the anchor. The center of something vast and waiting. The audio fractured. The chamber dimmed again. The chronicler stood in silence, the words sinking into him like stone dropped into still water. Anakin had been the convergence point, not a weapon, not a savior, a door, and through him something ancient had looked back into the galaxy. He turned to Kalith, his voice barely a whisper. We thought the Force created him, but what if it only allowed him? What if something else entered through the wound, the Jedi, and Sith had torn open over centuries of conflict? What if Anakin was not born to restore the balance, but to reveal the fracture that balance had always concealed? Kalith did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on the star map behind him. The coordinates from the breach event were pulsing again, this time with a second set layered over them. A future point, unmarked, approaching. The chronicler stepped closer. The two moments overlapped like twin reflections. One past, one yet to come. As if the Force were not guiding time forward, but folding it inward. And whatever had come before was coming again, not in the same shape, not in the same vessel, but with the same purpose. They stood together, silent in the glow of the dying station. Everything they had discovered pointed to a truth long buried beneath symbols and prophecy. The Chosen One had never been a single act. It had been a warning, a fracture. And now the galaxy stood once again on its edge. The Force did not sleep. It remembered, and what it remembered, it would answer. The ship drifted beyond the known lanes now, carried not by coordinates, but by instinct, pulled along the threads of something neither the chronicler nor Kalith could name. There were no more clues in the archives, no maps or messages waiting to be found. Only fragments, echoes. And yet the Force had not gone silent. It guided them still, not with clarity, but with pressure, as if urging them toward one final understanding. Somewhere ahead, past the veil of stars, was the answer they had come seeking. But first, they needed to speak to those who had once tried to explain it and failed. The next world was verdant and hushed, forgotten by most, hidden behind magnetic storms and ancient sensor scramblers. It had once been home to a small Jedi, sanctuary not for training or battle but for meditation, a place where knowledge was not written but remembered in silence. Some of the oldest masters had come here in exile after the Clone Wars, not to hide, but to wait, hoping that someday someone would come with the right questions. The temple was still standing, though worn with age and overgrown with roots and moss. Its stone walls were lined with inscriptions that had faded into time, and within its inner chamber sat a gathering of holocrons arranged in a perfect circle. Each one had belonged to a Jedi who had doubted the official histories, who had sensed something deeper behind the fate of Anakin Skywalker. The chronicler activated them one by one, their voices rising gently into the still air, speaking not in argument, but reflection. One voice belonged to Master Varys Sen, a seer from the Outer Rim who had once warned the Council that balance did not mean peace. She had seen visions of fire and rebirth, of a child in darkness who walked with light behind his eyes. She had been silenced. Another was Master Tamari, who believed the Force operated on scales far beyond the Jedi's understanding. He had written of patterns repeating across millennia, of chosen ones rising not once, but many times whenever the galaxy reached the edge of collapse. His final entry had been marked with confusion. He wrote that this time the pattern had changed. Kalith listened carefully. She did not speak, not at first, but when she did, her voice carried the weight of everything they had uncovered. If balance is not a final state, but a cycle, then what did Anakin truly end? What did he interrupt? And what, if anything, did he awaken? The chronicler answered quietly. Maybe he ended nothing. Maybe he was the first to see the pattern and break it. And maybe that is why the Force responded. Not with peace, but with a pause, as if waiting to see what would come next. They sat in the center of the temple, surrounded by the silent glow of the holocrons. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying a calm that felt old, as if the planet itself remembered the ones who had once come seeking truth. For the first time, there was no fear in their questions, only the quiet weight of understanding. Kaleth shared her final discovery, a personal journal written by one of the Jedi archivists who had escaped the Purge. It contained no prophecies, no visions, only thoughts. He wrote that perhaps the greatest mistake the Jedi ever made was believing that the Chosen One was theirs, that the prophecy belonged to them. He questioned whether the Force had ever spoken to the Order at all, or whether they had only heard what they wished to hear. The chronicler closed his eyes. That truth, simple and unguarded, echoed louder than any vision. The Force had not created Anakin for the Jedi. It had not sent him to destroy the Sith. It had allowed a moment of fracture, a tear in the structure both orders had built, because both had become blind to the depth of what they served. He rose slowly, stepping into the light that poured through the broken ceiling above. The Force moved gently around him, no longer urgent, no longer hidden. It felt not like a command, but like a presence, not demanding obedience, but recognition. The story of the Chosen One had never been about one man. It had been about awareness, about seeing beyond systems, beyond titles, beyond fear. As they prepared to leave, Kalith stood beside him and asked what would come next. If the Force had paused, would it move again? Would it call another? Would the cycle return? The chronicler did not answer, not because he did not know, but because he understood that the answer was not his to give. The Force would speak again when it was ready, and perhaps this time those who listened would not try to control it. Perhaps they would simply listen. They departed the temple in silence, the world behind them breathing in stillness once more. No grand revelations remained. Only the memory of those who had tried to understand, and the knowledge that the truth had always been more than any one prophecy, any one man could contain. In the darkness between stars, something ancient stirred, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in remembrance. The Force does not forget, and it never stops reaching for balance, no matter how long the silence lasts. The stars stretched endlessly ahead as the ship moved toward its final destination. No coordinates were entered, no specific system marked. It was the Force that guided them, now subtle and steady, like the undertow of a great current beneath still water. The journey had become something more than a search. It had become a return, not to a place, but to an understanding long buried beneath centuries of belief. The prophecy was no longer the question, it was the key. And now, at the end of all paths, the door was beginning to open. They emerged from hyperspace into an uncharted region, a place where the fabric of space folded strangely and time felt slower. At its center drifted a fragment of a planet, shattered yet held together by threads of unseen energy. It rotated in silence, untouched by history, unclaimed by war. The chronicler felt the pull before the ship even moved. This was where the last piece had to be. This was where the truth had waited. They descended carefully onto the broken surface. The air shimmered, not with heat, but with memory. Every step they took echoed softly, as if the land itself remembered every presence that had ever passed through. And there, within a spiral canyon carved by ancient forces, stood a structure. It was not made by Jedi hands nor Sith. Its shape was unfamiliar, yet the symbol etched into its center was unmistakable. The same that had followed them from Ossus to Jedha to Orsis, the spiral, the eye, the convergence. Inside, the structure opened into a chamber that defied natural form. Its walls curved inward without edges. Light moved strangely across the surfaces. At its center hovered a crystal, suspended without support, pulsing with a rhythm that matched no machine. It was alive with the Force, not as a weapon, not as a message. As a memory, the chronicler stepped forward and placed his hand near the surface. It responded not with sound, but with presence. He was no longer in the chamber. He was standing among stars. Before him stood Anakin Skywalker, not as the Jedi, not as Vader, but as both. His face was calm, his eyes steady. Around him, echoes of other figures moved, flickering like shadows cast by light from behind a veil. Some bore lightsabers. Some did not. All watched silently. Anakin spoke, but not with his voice. The Force spoke through him. I was not chosen to end darkness. I was chosen to reveal it, in them, in you, in me. The Jedi feared emotion, the Sith worshipped it, but neither listened. They saw the Force as a means, as something to master. But I was not sent to serve either path. I was the path, a fracture so the light could be seen through it. The stars shifted. Images flowed around the chronicler. The rise of the Republic, the war, the fall of the Temple, the birth of Luke, the redemption, the death of Palpatine. Then silence. And after the silence, something else. Not another war, not another empire, but something rising beneath the surface, a presence without name, a will without face. It had moved once. It would move again. Anakin stepped closer. Balance was never peace. It was awareness of the whole, of the true center, not obedience, not domination, but understanding. The Force cannot choose sides. Only people do. And when they do, the Force responds. It always responds. The vision faded. The chronicler was back in the chamber. The crystal pulsed one final time and then dimmed. He stepped away, breath steady, but his heart heavy with the weight of what he had seen. The Force had not chosen Anakin to save the galaxy. It had allowed him to be born so the galaxy could see what it had become, a mirror cracked wide enough to let truth shine through. Kalith approached, her eyes full of questions, but she asked none. She had felt it too, the clarity, the sorrow, the understanding. What Palpatine had feared was never the boy. It was the failure of control. He had built his empire on domination, on bending the Force to his will. But in Anakin, the Force had moved not as a weapon, but as a wave. A correction. They left the chamber together, stepping into the thin light of the ancient sky. Around them, the world was quiet, but no longer empty. It felt complete. The search was not over. But the question had changed. The prophecy was not a warning of a single event. It was a pattern, one the galaxy had never stopped repeating, and perhaps never would. In the silence that followed, the chronicler remembered the first message, the one they had found buried in flame and ruin. He still lives. Not in body, not in shadow, but in purpose, in memory, in the presence of a will greater than any master. The Force had never been a battlefield. It had been a mirror. And now, for the first time, it had been seen clearly. They returned to the ship without words. Some truths do not require speaking. Some stories end not with answers, but with understanding. The crystal had gone dark, but the light it revealed remained. They did not return the way they had come. There was no hyperspace route to trace back. No destination waiting to be logged. The stars shifted around them like unfamiliar eyes, and the ship drifted slowly through the dark, unbound from galactic paths. The chronicler sat in quiet thought, no longer searching, no longer reaching forward, but reflecting on what had been revealed. Across the galaxy, the story of the Chosen One had already settled into legend. A boy born without a father, a Jedi turned Sith, a tyrant redeemed by love. The tale was complete in the minds of those who survived it. But legends simplify, what truth complicates, and now he understood that the real story had not ended with Anakin Skywalker. It had only fallen silent. Kalith stood beside the viewport, watching the stars. She had studied the prophecy for half her life, believed in it once, then questioned it, then pursued it across forgotten worlds in search of clarity. What they had uncovered was more than she expected and less than she hoped. Not a final answer, but a mirror held up to every being who ever claimed to know what the Force desired. The Force had not spoken in absolutes, it had whispered through choices, and now the consequences of those choices drifted like dust across time. The ship passed through a corridor of broken satellites, remnants of a war long buried, each fragment a reminder that the galaxy had been shaped by fear disguised as vision. The Jedi had feared attachment, the Sith had feared weakness, and both had built legacies on control. But the Force had never obeyed. It had only responded, and in Anakin it had responded with a storm. The chronicler opened the final archive, from the Bastion vaults. Its encryption had resisted all previous attempts, but now it yielded as if it had been waiting. A holo-recording filled the screen. Not a Jedi, not a Sith, a senator, Bail Organa. His face was tired, his voice steady. The message had been recorded days before his death. He spoke not of war, but of truth. He had once believed in heroes, believed in prophecy, believed that some chosen light would cast away the dark. But as the Republic fell and the Jedi were scattered, he began to see the shape of something else, something older than any order, older than any temple, a pattern of rise and fall, of blindness and reckoning. He said the Force was not guiding history, it was reflecting it. His final words stayed with the chronicler long after the recording faded. Perhaps the Chosen One was not meant to save us. Perhaps he was meant to show us that we had lost the ability to save ourselves. That thought returned again and again as they traveled through the deep void. The prophecy had never been about light destroying darkness. It had been about confronting the lie that one could ever exist without the other. Anakin had not defeated evil. He had revealed its roots in pride, in fear, in the refusal to see others as whole. They arrived at a small moon where survivors of the old Jedi Order had begun planting gardens above the ruins of a temple. It was not a shrine. It was not a place of power. It was a place of peace, a place where the Force was not worshipped, but simply allowed to exist. The chronicler walked through the fields, listening to the voices of those who had chosen not to rebuild the past, but to live gently in its shadow. He spoke with one of them, a quiet woman named Dira, who had once been a Padawan during the Purge. She had felt Anakin's presence when the temple burned. She remembered the fear, the confusion, the betrayal, but she did not speak of him with anger. She said the Force moved through him with pain, and pain, if not understood, always becomes harm. She had forgiven him, not because she was told to, but because she had seen what happened when a galaxy refuses to heal. She believed the prophecy had never meant a single act. It had meant a reckoning within the hearts of all who could feel the Force. The war had ended. The Empire had fallen. But the reckoning remained. The chronicler stood at the edge of the field, looking at the horizon where two suns hung low in the sky. He remembered the boy from the vision. Anakin standing in the dark, light behind his eyes, the weight of something vast pressing down on him. No one had truly understood what he carried, not the Jedi, not the Sith, perhaps not even himself. Caliph joined him. They said little. The journey was no longer about seeking, it had become about carrying. Not the burden of prophecy, but the awareness of what it truly meant. That balance is not a final state. It is a choice made every day. A choice to see, a choice to feel, a choice to act with understanding. The Force does not demand loyalty. It does not choose champions. It waits, and when forgotten, it moves, quietly, in silence, through those who are willing not to control, but to witness. They would return, not to temples or archives or forgotten moons, but to the stories, to the truths buried in legend, to remind others that the Chosen One did not come to fix a broken galaxy. He came to reveal the fracture. And now it is up to those who remain to decide what to do with what was shown. The Force does not end. It remembers. And through that memory, it watches, always. Night had settled across the garden moon, casting long shadows over the silent hills. Twin moons drifted through a blanket of stars, their glow soft against the fields that swayed gently in the wind. No ships passed overhead. No signals echoed through the sky. The galaxy beyond still churned in its endless cycle of struggle and order and chaos, but here there was only stillness. the kind of stillness that does not silence, but listens. The chronicler sat on a worn stone ledge overlooking the valley. The journey behind him was not one of distance, but of depth. Each world, each echo of the past had not brought closure, but a widening of awareness. The prophecy had once seemed a puzzle to solve, a question with a single name as its answer. But now it felt like something else entirely. A thread woven into the fabric of the galaxy, not to guide destiny, but to reflect it. Not to point the way forward, but to show what had always been present. He watched as Kalith walked among the younger initiates tending to the quiet gardens. She did not teach them to fight. She did not speak of Jedi trials or ranks. She told them stories, stories of balance found not in victory, but in clarity, of choices that did not divide, but revealed. She had changed. They both had. The Force had revealed itself not as a force of conquest or submission, but as a breath that moved through all things constant and unclaimed. He thought of Anakin often now, not as a warning, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. A boy shaped by prophecy and fear, who became the axis of galactic history, not because he was strong, but because he was fragile. A child who carried the expectations of an entire order and the manipulation of a rising darkness. And yet, in the end, he chose. Not for power, not for victory, but for love. A single choice that echoed across stars, not as redemption, but as recognition. The Force had not broken him. It had waited for him to see it clearly. The chronicler closed his eyes and listened. Not with his ears, but with his breath, with his memory. The Force was there, not in flashes of power or flashes of anger, but in the silence that followed truth. It had always been there. In the bonds between people, in the grief of loss, in the courage to forgive. The prophecy had never promised peace. It had promised balance. And balance was not a destination. It was a way of seeing the world. Time passed gently on the garden moon. Seasons shifted. New voices joined the old. The galaxy beyond remained restless, but within this quiet place, something had been remembered. Not rebuilt, not enforced, remembered. The story of the Chosen One would be told again, as all legends are, but perhaps now it would be told not as a tale of saviors and tyrants, but as a reminder of the cost of forgetting who we are when we try to control what cannot be controlled. As the sky darkened to a velvet blue, the chronicler stepped away from the edge and made his way through the fields. Each footstep pressed softly into the earth, marking no path, leaving no trail. Above him, the stars pulsed gently, scattered across the sky like distant memories. He did not look back. There was nothing behind him that had been left unfinished. The answers he had once sought now lived in the questions he no longer feared to ask. In the stillness, a final thought took shape. The Force is not a prophecy. It is not a war. It is not a side. It is a presence, a rhythm, a breath shared by all life. It watches not to judge, but to understand. And in its presence there are no chosen ones. There are only those who choose to listen. And so the story ends, not in triumph, not in sorrow, but in quiet, in a field beneath the stars where the Force sleeps in the roots of trees and in the hearts of those who remember. The prophecy is not over. It never was. It lives on in silence, in peace, in balance. And if you find yourself drawn to its mystery, remember to return. For the galaxy is vast, and its secrets are never truly lost, only waiting, always waiting to be seen again.